Welcome to the KIMIYA Healing Podcast. My name is Safa, and this podcast is going to be about what to do when you are experiencing a very deep transformational phase of either a spiritual initiation or a very deep healing process that is essentially shifting the ground and recalibrating your nervous system to the degree where you're experiencing a lot of discomfort, or you're experiencing some level of disturbance, or fear is arising, or heavy emotions are coming up and you're not sure what to do, or you're trying your best to navigate and maybe you just need some tips and some support. First thing I'd like to say is that you're not alone in experiencing deep transformational shifts, and these are very natural cycles that we go through as humans. And when we start to embody our deeper potential and we start to particularly grow spiritually and do very deep healing work and shadow work, we start to experience more explicitly these cycles and what they mean for us. And we start to become more aware of the fact that they are playing out through our lives and they are calling us deeper. Now, you may be aware that as we approach the end of the year, it's a very intense and transformational time. And if you've been feeling this, then this podcast is going to be really useful for you. So please keep listening. You might even want to take some notes. So I've been feeling this myself, certainly. And for me, the cycles of death and rebirth actually used to be very long. And I used to have cycles that were many years long, and not really realizing that I was repeating the same emotions or the same behaviors, etc. And gradually, these cycles for me have started to shorten. So I've been able to grow faster and transform faster because I've been able to become more aware sooner. So essentially, what I like to say is less drama and less karma. And the less drama and karma you have, and the less drama and karma you're creating, then essentially your cycles can become more fluidic, more harmonized, clearer about what they're taking away from you and what they're giving you. And they might never be easy or smooth sailing, but you can become more graceful in the way you move through them. So what I'd like to say is that if we think about this divine orchestration of death and rebirth within ourselves, and it's happening at a cellular level within our bodies all the time, and at a neurological level all the time. And when it comes to our perceptual level and our behavioral level, of course, it takes much longer for that to really catch up. And all of these levels will be occurring together, from the physical to the energetic. Now, this is quite a miracle. If you imagine that we are constantly crumbling and constantly recreating in every moment, it's quite miraculous that we even have the same mundane perception of ourselves as ordinary human beings that many of us do. That in itself, the processes that we allow and facilitate and create for ourselves are miraculous processes. So when we start to accept that actually this is a miracle, even though it feels terrific and painful and terrifying, it's a miracle and it's never going to get old. And it's always going to continue as long as we, in our consciousness, allow it to be so, such that we will constantly be experiencing deeper and deeper levels of discomfort and excruciation and challenge, and deeper levels of peace and stillness and perfection. Now, these are perhaps on the surface polarities, because we will try to reject one and we will try to celebrate and accept the other. So the more we start to push parts of ourselves away and push parts of our process away and try to live in particular states of say perfection or stillness, it can create more polarity. So it's a really fine line between how we hold the polarity within us. So we need to allow ourselves to essentially hold an acceptance, and that's what allows us to become still. The acceptance of the discomfort and the pain, and the acceptance of the perfection and the peace. And we hold that polarity when we're still. That's the only time we can truly accept. And at the frequencies that they're both playing out, or that it's all playing out within us, when we sit and we're still and we accept it all within our own hearts, then it gradually starts to dissolve within our field of consciousness. And we can then do what? We can then do it all again, just at a deeper level. So this is essentially the journey that we are all on as human beings, whether or not we're conscious of it, or whether we are actively working with our process of self-illumination. So I just want to share some tips, and these are tips that I have really learned through my own journey. It's not really advice that you're going to be able to get very easily by searching through Google. This is for those of you who are already engaged in your own self-healing, somatic healing, energetic work, and you really are looking for some specific guidance. This is really going to help you. So I'm sharing with you what I've learned through my own journey, and let me know how you find this content and whether it's helpful for you. So the first thing, my first tip, which is really important because it is number one, is accept that you want to become undone. And I talk about this a lot in the womb room work that we do, which is that becoming undone is what we are here for. We're not here to build anything new. Everything already exists. We're here to become undone and accept it. And accept at deeper and deeper levels what we are really capable of experiencing. When we accept that we are here to become undone, and that this process that we're experiencing is catalyzing our undoing, we suddenly take a very different perspective of our perceived self-suffering or our initiation. If we don't accept that we want to become undone, it either means that we are perfect and therefore we have no further growth prospects, or we are absolutely terrified of letting go of our identity in its existing structure and form, opening our minds and growing. Now, both of these are ego states. Both of these states lead to immense suffering. Why? Because essentially you create a feeling of being trapped. You create a cage around you, a vibrational cage. And you guys will hear me talking a lot about the vibrational cage because it literally feels like a cage. You rattle within it. You cannot move beyond it. You have limited yourself to particular constructs and concepts. These relate to vibrational realms, and therefore there you are in your box, believing that there's nowhere else to move, there's nowhere else for you to grow, and or not really accepting that you need to break out of this box if you want to help yourself. So when you hold as your guiding North Star that you are here to become undone, when you start to experience the unraveling, the deep and uncomfortable unraveling inside your core that normally would make your mind freak out and make you start to think all the things you think about yourself, hopefully remembering this will allow you to gain some perspective and to hold your process in the perspective that it needs to be held for it to become a healing process rather than a torment. The second thing I'd like to offer you is to get enough sleep. And this is really important because our brain detoxifies only at night in the particular way that our lymphatic system works, where it's active at night. So therefore, we need to make sure that we are sleeping at night. And believe it or not, I have met many people who have flipped their cycles, and for whatever reason, whether it's because they're on medication or because of their job or just because of something they've told themselves about when they like to sleep and when they like to be awake, they're actually not sleeping through the night at the depth that they need to be sleeping in order for their brain to detoxify. And it creates a lot of issues and problems, especially when it's maintained over a long period of time. So my advice is, do not fuck with your natural rhythms just because you're confused and stressed about what is happening to you. If you're confused and stressed about what is happening to you, naturally there's going to be a reciprocal effect in your hormonal system, in your neurochemistry. So it may lead to it being harder for you to fall asleep. It may lead to you waking up in the middle of the night. It's really important that you take all steps that you can take to not normalize that, whereby you don't then start to build a habit around the experience of waking up in the middle of the night and watching something or listening to a podcast and then going back to sleep, that you actually really focus on normalizing your cycles and telling yourself that, no, it's really important that you go to bed at a decent hour, you wake up at a decent hour and get some light during the day, and when it's dark, you sleep. That is how the body is designed to exist. And that is when our neurological and endocrine systems are working at their best capacity, when we are aligning with our natural cycles. Everything is supposed to be in tune and in a particular cycle according to the light that we experience. So make sure if you're going through an initiation that you are getting enough sleep and you're not sacrificing that. Third point I'd like to make is about storytelling. At the beginning of your trauma healing journey, you need to tell some stories. You really need to learn how to tell some stories. And I often get people that come to me and they have got no stories because they have done not enough self-reflection about what has happened in their life. So when you start to understand your life events and your life experiences and what has been happening for you, you can start to tell your story. This is really important at the beginning stages of trauma healing. But when it comes to these deep processes and these deep initiations, there has to come a point where we stop telling stories. Now, what I mean by this is, in a deep initiation, you are being invited to feel and to dissolve that particular frequency into your heart, into a place where it can be stilled and it can be accepted. If you're busy telling stories and your mind is very active and you've decided that feeling this relates to XYZ event and feeling this relates to that and feeling this means that, what you're doing is you're, in a way, creating more webs, more neural networks around particular sensations and imprints and energetic fluctuations that don't necessarily need to be there. So what I mean by that is, imagine you want to wipe a slate clean. If you want to wipe a slate clean, you don't write little stories on the board as you try to wipe the slate clean. You just take a cloth and wipe. Maybe that's not the best analogy. It's not one of my best analogies. I've got way better ones than that. But you see what I'm trying to say is that we can't feel deeply enough to heal when our mind is spinning stories. And that includes stories about love, light, angels, unicorns, whatever else, werewolves, dolphins, whatever else that you're spinning to try to make sense of a particular vibration. If you really want to move fast and smoothly through initiations, the hardest thing to do and the purest thing that you can do is to let go of the mind and just feel. And just feel and just keep feeling and keep feeling and keep feeling, because as fractals start to open in the field and you're feeling into them and they take you deeper and deeper and deeper, if your mind is full and you've got these stories, they will only take you to a certain level of depth. You've got to get rid of the mind. You've got to let go of the stories. You have to allow yourself to just feel. And that comes from the heart, just feeling, 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 feeling. It's very hard to put into words. Feeling freely means the mind feels safe. Feeling with a mind full of stories means that at some level we feel inherently unsafe. We don't feel like we can allow ourselves to surrender. So we're protecting ourselves. And that's fine. But if we want to allow ourselves to de-armor and go deeper, we have to let go of the mind. And this is really the realm of heart alchemy, and the session that I did, group healing session that I did this year called Brain Dead, where it really allows you to just completely let go of any type of thought or story and just feel. Because when we do that, we also allow other possibilities. We allow ourselves to create a new story because we're feeling. We're clearing the slate. We're not feeling with a narrative. Fourth point I'd like to make. If you are going through a very, very difficult initiation and you found yourself constantly telling yourself how bad it feels, how terrible you are, how all of this stuff, you can't believe how all of this stuff is coming up after all the healing work you've done. I hear this so many times. It's incredible. I'm glad it's finally made it into a podcast, actually. I hear this so many times, and it's such a natural human reaction to go, how am I still experiencing this when I have done so much healing? Look, you're always going to be taken deeper, right? If you don't want to go deeper, numb yourself out. But most of you who are listening to this podcast will not have done the work that you've done if you were going to go down the route of suddenly just going, you know what, I want to just numb out here at this level. No, we always want to go deeper into our potential and deeper into peace. So the point I'm trying to make is, if you are finding yourself telling all these horror stories about what this means for you and how hard this is for you and how terrifying this is and how uncomfortable it is, recognize that that narrative isn't balanced and doesn't have perspective. When you recognize that, you will start to get some perspective. It's like walking out and constantly talking about the fact it's too cold and it's raining and the sky's grey and this and that. It's like, if that's all you can see, you're missing the picture. And that means you don't have perspective. So whenever that comes up, and it's natural for these kind of thoughts to come up, when you are feeling trauma releasing from your body, or you are going through a process of shifts in the nervous system, transformational change, especially at an identity level, you will start to feel these things. Just tell yourself, I need to get more perspective. And what is the perspective that you need to get? The perspective that you need to get is, it goes back to the first point, which is that you are becoming undone. So every time you tell yourself the story about how hard this is, how terrible you are, how you're always doing everything wrong, how this must be your punishment, how you're never going to get out of this, etc., etc. Just recognize that there's perspective, opportunity. And you can even say to yourself, okay, now I've said that, let me try to say this with a bit more perspective. Let me try to find a new perspective or a deeper perspective in all of this. This is not easy to do when you're in it. So hopefully you're listening to this podcast, and when and if you find yourself in it, you will remember these words. You will remember to ask yourself for perspective. And then you can start to say, okay, the perspective I need is that actually, while this does feel so terrible and it is making me feel like I never do anything right, that has been a pattern for my whole life. I've always felt like a failure. I've always felt like I can never do anything right. I never achieved anything. And this is now my chance. This is my chance to change that pattern of feeling, that change those neural networks in my brain and change the way I feel about myself, because I'm tired of feeling that way. When we only allow ourselves to feel that way without checking in and challenging, without getting perspective, all we do is repeat cycles. So a lot of the work I do with my one-to-one clients is really supporting them to learn how to challenge themselves in a way that is direct, compassionate, and leads to an instant shift in self-understanding. Because if we never challenge ourselves, especially when there's been trauma and when there's been shame, we will always fall back onto the baseline that our nervous system is wired to. And for people who've experienced a lifetime of trauma, or their trauma goes all the way back to birth trauma, birth shock, in utero trauma, ancestral trauma, when the nervous system is wired as a baby to hold fear, to hold pain, to hold terror, that is what we will fall back to and fall back on. And the only way to break the cycles is to do the body work and the nervous system reworking, to allow for the nervous system to release all of that pain and that trauma and that charge, and then to start rebuilding by challenging the existing systems that are in place. The final thing I'd like to say, actually no, it's not a final thing, but one of the last points I'd like to make is giving yourself the space to process, giving yourself the space to actually feel. If we want deep transformational change, we need to allow ourselves to go through the process. But if we never give ourselves space, if we're always too busy with the job, with the family, with the cooking, with the cleaning, with the God knows what, if we're always packed and the days always look the same, how can we ever process anything new? How can we ever shed the old? We can't, because the day and the weeks and the months and the years are scheduled so that there cannot be growth, because there is no space. There has to be space. And this is why people go on retreats or they go on holiday. They try to get space. And big things can happen on these holidays. Big things can happen on these retreats, right? Because it's finally the point at which we get some perspective, or we get to look at our lives through a different lens, from a place of our nervous system perhaps being a bit more settled, more balanced. We feel more relaxed, and then we can reflect on what we're actually doing and what we're actually feeling. But this is not, for me, it's never been about allowing that to only be a once a year thing when I go on holiday. If that can be part of your daily life, trying to create spaces that are still and safe, that allow you to process, you will grow much faster than having a packed schedule with minimal growth opportunities or spaces or processing spaces, and then once a year you do a Vipassana and you feel amazing for a month afterwards, and then you go straight back into doing exactly what you were doing. It has to be part of your philosophy, the way you live your life. If you're on this path of deep self-illumination and spiritual growth and deeper embodiment, these spaces become very, very important. And actually, the more space you can take, the better. So crafting spaces for yourself intentionally, and maybe even putting a time box around it and saying, okay, I know I'm going through a deep process of transformation and it feels horrific and uncomfortable. And I also know that it's bringing up all of these old patterns of mine, all of these old shadow Sheilas that need to come up. And I recognize what needs to be done and where I need to go with my heart, with my feeling, what I need to changes I need to make. I recognize that. And I'm going to set aside an hour every Friday to process, or every Sunday, or Friday and Sunday. You figure it out. What does it need to be? And how can you create that for yourself consistently? This will help you immensely. I say the reason why I was able and have been able to grow my practice so fast at lightning speed is because I intentionally crafted into my schedule space for initiations, space to go deeper within myself. And I knew I would need time off. I knew I would need space for myself. I knew I would need solitude. That's the way that I access deeper stillness. Therefore, I need to have that built in. It's just as important to me as any other type of business operation. In fact, if you're working in a healing art, that is probably the most important business operation is the space that you create for yourself. And I talk more about this in my online course called Soul-Based Marketing. You can access that at the School of Healing Alchemy if you're interested, if you're a practitioner and you're interested in how to grow your practice from a vibrational standpoint, from I take you step by step through what it means to hold a space and what you need to do in order to craft a space that people actually want to heal in. It starts with and ends with you. If you have no space in your life, in your mind, in your body, if you don't feel spacious, how can you help another human being to access space within them? It doesn't happen like that. We are the space holders because we create space. We are the still space. That's what allows people to come inside and become undone in the stillness. So if we don't have stillness in our life, if our nervous system is not still, if our mind is not still, if our life is not still, nobody's going to come into our space to become undone. It cannot happen. And you don't need to worry then about why things aren't happening for you or clients aren't coming. Clients aren't coming because you don't have the space ready for them. You don't have the space ready for yourself. So this is now probably sounding quite logical. And maybe you're like, yeah, I actually really get that. Good. If you get that, start practicing how you can create space for yourself. And if you have a family and a very busy schedule, or you've been homeschooling your children during the lockdown, as many of you have, recognize you're going to need even more space. You're going to need even more space for yourself because you don't just have your stuff to process. You also have your families. And it's really important that you give yourself this depth of self-care. It's like spiritual self-care. Space is the number one spiritual self-care. This is why solitude is so important. And this is why a lot of mystics and philosophers and people who are accessing very high levels of consciousness and high levels of quantum intelligence are essentially operating in solitude, because the level of stillness that you can access and what comes through when you're still far surpasses what comes through when you're around other people. Unless you have a shared intention of accessing stillness together, like we do in our group healing spaces, where we experience a profound depth of stillness together in the field. But you're not going to experience that by going out to lunch with your friends. You're not going to experience that in a coffee shop. You're not going to experience that hanging out and watching Netflix, right? Divine inspiration doesn't happen like that. Divine inspiration requires preparation. You can quote that. That's quite a good quote. Divine inspiration requires preparation. And discipline, which I'll talk about in another podcast. Finally, 2 more points I have to make. If you're self-medicating with anything, which is very easy to do, just recognize that that's what you're doing. Because when you experience difficult initiations, difficult trials, you may need to reach out for something. And I often work with people who reach out for food or distractions of some sort. Try to recognize that the need to self-medicate is human, and that what you're doing needs to be balanced. I'm not here to tell you, don't do that, stop doing that, although I sometimes do. But I'm here to suggest that you might want to balance it. So if you know, okay, I definitely ate the whole packet of biscuits because I could not bear to feel that emotion and I needed to numb in that particular moment because I just couldn't deal with it. The next day, don't do the same thing. Do something to balance it. Go for a run. Go to the gym. Have something healthy. Do a gut cleanse. Try to find a way to balance your self-medicating with practices of self-love so that gradually you can support your nervous system to access a place of deeper harmony where you don't need to be going into places where you have to reach for whatever substance it is that you're reaching for. I feel like balance is probably holding that in mind as another guiding star. Balance through your initiations will really help, because we're living in modern times and we have to find our own ways to find modern balance when we're dealing with deep and ancient processes that maybe the world around us and the systems and structures around us are not catering to allowing. And when we have shamanic initiations, back in the day, it would be all immersion, a total full immersion in the jungle, solitude, away from family, away from friends, away from comforts, away from so many distractions would just be taken away. Space would be made for deep, deep processes to occur and deep transformational field shifts to occur. Now, we don't have... That would all be supported by a tribe, a community, a philosophy, a paradigm, ritual. It would all be codified. It would all be normalized. And when it's normalized, it can be supported much more easily. For those of us who are embarking on deep transformational and spiritual work, we have to make our own space, because those types of systems, unless you're living in the jungle, I'm not, I'm living in North London, we have to do this ourselves, which means we have to ritualize our own life. And I've got a podcast about that, how the importance of ritualizing your life and what it can do for you, not only from a productivity standpoint, but also from a self-care point of view and a way for you to access and channel higher levels of information and insight and creativity. And slowly starting to create personalized rituals and spaces for yourself to go through these transformational shifts, you will start to maybe even enjoy them. So my final point is, if you're still listening and you've stayed for this podcast, is when you experience transformational initiations and you know that you are being changed in divine and miraculous ways, and you're being prepared for something so much deeper than what you could even imagine, but something within you tells you, yes, this is what I dreamed about, this is what I I knew I would have to prepare for one day. When you are there in that place and it feels really tough, you probably feel like you're the only person going through it, just recognize you can also try to enjoy it. Why? Because you can guarantee it's not going to last forever. All cycles come to an end. New ones begin, certainly, but you will slowly arrive at the end of that cycle, and the next one will feel maybe similar, but not the same. So if you can allow yourself to enjoy the dance in the light, the dance in the dark, wherever you are, wherever you found yourself, because it's not forever. It's a temporary moment in time. It's in the space, in the true notion of what you are. It's a flicker. It's a flicker of eternity. But when it lasts for a week, it feels like hell, yes. But you are not there to acknowledge only your human form. You're there to acknowledge the whole, everything that you are. And that is a timeless consciousness beyond time and space. Therefore, the discomfort and the pain, and even the elation and the joy, is just a flicker in eternity. Try to enjoy it. Try to smile at yourself and say, somehow, some way, I chose this. And if I've chosen this, it means I'm strong enough to do it. If you've enjoyed listening to this podcast, or you have any questions or suggestions, I would love to hear from you. Please reach out. And you might also want to share some tips that you have for how you navigate your transformational change. I hope that you have found this useful, and you might like to listen to the other podcasts that I have or join my next group healing sessions. If you would like to join, please visit my website, kimiyahealing.co.uk. And if you're interested in a personalised healing program, please reach out to me and book a free consultation and healing plan.